joining us today. It's really nice to have such a great turnout and actually having to move to a larger room. That's not a bad thing either, so thank you for joining us. I'm curious how many people have attended an integrative and experiential learning session before? Most people. So we've got some new people here, so that's great. One of the reasons, I'm just going to I have to stand close to Carrie because I don't have a microphone on here. So I'm using her microphone as well. So one of the reasons, or several of the reasons that we hold these, is we want people to be more aware of the kinds of experiential education and opportunities that are happening across campus. We're looking at trying to share more about how students are making those connections between what's happening in the classroom and how they might be able to use what they're learning in the classroom outside the classroom. We also want to highlight best practices, so what we can do in the classroom to help students foster this ability to integrate and make those connections. And finally, we hope that after you have heard what Carrie and her two students are going to tell us today, we hope that it sparks some ideas that maybe you might be able to take back to your classroom or tell your colleagues and maybe incorporate it a little bit more. With that being said, I'm going to give you a minute just to take a look at the handout that we have. It's 10 design elements for authentic learning experiences. And as Carrie talks about her activity today, you'll see that a lot of the things that are on this list are actually present in the activity that she has her students do. So I'll just give you a few minutes to look through the list of the design elements. Okay, so for those of you that are new to this series, one of the things that I like best about it is it's an opportunity to hear from instructors and students that are in their class. So we not only get the instructor's perspective, we also get to hear from the students how it impacted their learning. And today is no different. We have Carrie Mitchell from the School of Planning, and she's teaching a first year course. And we have two of her past students. So one is a current student, Mila, and we have Paul with us, who used to be a student. It was a couple of years ago now. Is that?
Yeah, it's 3-4 years.
3 or 4 years ago. But he's back, and he's a TA now. So he's going to bring the perspective of helping students along and be in the role of a TA. When I first met Carrie, one of the things that I noticed right away was her passion for teaching and learning. And one of the things that she said is, I really wanted to do something that would allow my students to come away with something that they could use after they left the classroom if they were going to pursue a career in planning. And I just wanted to show the other thing that I thought was really nice was she shared with me her syllabus. And what she has done, and I believe Teaching Excellence Academy, so she spent 3 or 4 days with us, and her syllabus now is coded so that she has her learning outcomes. And if you go to her day-by-day classes, she's also drawn the students' attention to what those learning outcomes are. So in this particular area, they can go back and see what the red and the blue mean. So I thought it was a way to start getting students to really pay attention to those learning outcomes, because often the instructors are the only ones that pay attention to them, but now there's a reason for students to look at them as well. So thank you very much, Carrie and Paul and Mila, for sharing your experience, and I'll pass it over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine. Thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor to be able to chat with all of you today. And I also just wanted to thank Paul and Mila for showing up and being part of this as well. And this is really a collaborative presentation. But I'm going to start by giving some background about the course and how I've designed it. If it comes up here. Excellent. And like every course in Plan, and every class in Plan 102, we start with a little music. So this course used to be all about grammar, and it's changed a little bit. So I start many weeks ago in September with this song. Hopefully it's not too much for this crowd. And it goes on. So just a little fun, because planning should be fun, and grammar is really fun, as you'll find out as we go along. So just a little bit of background about me. Prior to coming to the University of Waterloo, I worked in professional practice for 5.5 years. I was funding international development research. So when I think of the practice of planning, I think about it at a global scale. And I really think about urbanizing cities, not just here in Canada, but around the world. So a lot of my research in the past has been in Asia, but I had the opportunity to work in Africa and the Middle East and Latin America. So this is what is informing this class. So when I thought about professional communication, for me, it wasn't just about grammar and spelling. It was also about being able to communicate with multiple audiences to start to tackle some of our most wicked problems, like climate change, for example, which is my area of expertise and passion. So this is what I wanted to bring to Plan 102, was to move beyond just grammar and to make it more about strategic communications and all the different aspects of communications that planners will inevitably have to tackle in practice. So for me, when I introduce planning to my first-year students, I tell them it's a big puzzle. It's about people and their environments, and what planners do is try to figure out how this puzzle works together and bring people together as best as they possibly can. And it is all about people, and it is all about communications. So I also talked to them about the most important skills for practicing planners. And highlighting this article from The Guardian not too long ago, they said, well, the cult of the star architect has soared in recent decades. The figure of the town planner has arguably become comic shorthand for a faceless dullard. Yet, the role is crucial to our urban future and needs reinventing. So I fundamentally agree with this, along with a statement from Professor Andy Pratt, an economic geographer, who says that, in fact, probably the best educational training is something, in addition to technical skills, something like politics, along with expertise in softer skills of negotiation, partnership building, and group decision making. So that is also confirmed with a recent study on Planners Web of Canadian planners. And here are the 5 most important skills, and I show them this as well. 1, obviously, communication skills, speaking and writing. 2nd, this is a bit surprising for my first-year planners, listening. It's really critical, especially in a public meeting when you have a bunch of people arguing, right? Patience, knowledge, and good people skills. So I show them all this to really help to emphasize why a class in professional communications is so critical and why they should pay attention for the rest of the semester. And as Catherine showed, I do have 4 core components of the course, and because I'm a visual learner, I have highlighted them by color. And essentially what I want them to take away from this is to be able to write clear, concise, and properly formatted planning reports and proposals. So report writing and proposal writing are really the bread and butter of what planners do. And I wanted them to also please use grammatically correct English. 2nd, to develop that capacity to speak and listen professionally with both their peers and supervisors. Because I say, look at the person sitting next to you. They might be your colleague or your boss in a couple years' time. So we're going to start this professional practice soon and often. Another key component that I made explicit this year was to recognize and utilize different types of evidence. So peer review, gray literature, and reputable media sources. And what they do in the context of this course is to justify this through an environmental problem and a proposed solution, which I'll explain to you guys in a minute. And then finally, to apply all these skills. So it's not enough just to be able to memorize them and regurgitate them back to me on an exam. They need to be actually able to apply the skills in professional settings, which I also include the classroom as a professional setting. So in terms of the evaluation structure, the class is broken down into collaborative work and individual work. So collaboratively, they do a major assignment, which I'll share with you in a minute, which is 40% of their grade. 3 assignments over a period of 8 weeks. They also do a lot of individual work, including report writing, participation in lecture and tutorials, and a final test. And then I have a bonus challenge game, which I'll also explain in a minute. So this class is typically about 125 students. This year, it blew to 157. But this is completely manageable within our framework because we allocate all students into small groups of 4 or 5 to complete their proposals and to complete that collaborative work. So this year, I just added Paul as an extra TA, and he took care of the additional students. So this is really scalable. I mean, if we had to, although I wouldn't recommend it to the School of Planning, if we suddenly had 300 students, it could still be manageable just with a normal TA support. So let me introduce you to the major assignment that my students have been working on this year. So this is a national competition that started on September 5th. Lucky for me, it worked out perfectly with the timing of the course. And we have 37 teams who have designed proposals on an environmental problem and a solution and submitted videos to the EduTalks competition. So if you go on the EduTalks website right now, you will see a lot of our videos. We are competing this year against Ryerson and I think McMaster as well, but I think we're gonna win. Actually, they're really good. So I gave them a large umbrella to work under. You know, all practicing planners will have to deal with climate change and health in urban environments. So I said, I want all of you, all 37 groups in this class, to come up with a bright idea under the broad umbrella of climate change and health. And I'll show you a couple of videos in a minute. Now, to tackle wicked problems, we need to break it down into manageable chunks. So what I've also done this year is introduce the concept of design thinking, which is essentially a problem-solving protocol. And I've taken their assignment and pulled it apart into 8 weeks. So in week 3 of the course, we start to empathize with our users. So in this case, the user group are 17 to 22-year-olds. So what do 17 to 22-year-olds need to know or want to know about the broad problem of climate change and health? How does it relate to them? And so they need to be able to empathize with that user group. Similarly, when they're practicing planners, they need to empathize and ask questions of their communities. You know, they will become experts, but they always must ask. What do you need? What do you want? And I really believe fundamentally that good planning practice starts with asking what users need and want. So we do that in week 3. In week 4, we start to define the problem. So they've got this large umbrella problem, but what specifically are they going to do? And they start to look at how to write a problem statement. And this will hopefully become useful in years 2nd, 3rd, 4th, as they continue to define problems in planning practice. Week 5 is really exciting because we start to just brainstorm, ideate, mash up ideas. And I actually run a mash-up exercise in the class. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Glee, where they take 2 different songs and bring them together. So this year we took university classrooms and amusement parks as an example and mash it up. So what happens when you come up with crazy ideas that mash up 2 seemingly incompatible things? So we got ideas like, well, we'd put buttons in the classroom and then we would eject students who weren't paying attention. And something that we've actually implemented into this class is to have a theme song. And I'll share with you the theme song later. So you get all sorts of crazy, no idea is wrong. Everybody put their ideas on the table. And then things start to get a little bit more serious in week 6, where we prototype and test. And this week, thanks to help from Scott Anderson, we actually were able to do a double-blind peer review of all of these 37 projects. So each group got 3 to 4 anonymous reviews of their assignments back prior to submitting it for any grades. So they did this as part of the tutorial activity. And I think Paula mentioned this a little bit too, some actually completely got rid of their idea and started over based on their peers' feedback. So, and that works very well with design thinking because this is an iterative process and it's okay to fail and start over and redo. So they still have time within week 6 to start that process again. And then finally, in weeks 9 and 10 of the course, they submit their proposal. They just uploaded their video to EduTalks last week, and that is their first assignment for the course. And by January, we'll know if any of our teams have won. And I really hope that all of you will go on and like our videos because every vote counts. So that is how we've done the major collaborative assignment in this class. And I just wanted to share with you 2 videos that have come out of this process.
Approximately 1.7 million students attend Canadian universities each year. Of these students, 80% live only 1 to 2 kilometers away. However, it is found that 20% of students still use the car to get to class. Burning 4 pop cans of gas produces 1 bathtub of CO2. To fill up the gas tank of an average car requires 55 liters of gas. That's 55 bathtubs of carbon dioxide. Driving short distances is highly inefficient and produces greater nitrogen oxide emissions, which in turn creates acid rain. Negative impacts on the environment include air pollution and climate change. An over-reliance on automobiles poses many health problems for people, including acute respiratory disorders, asthma, decreasing in lung function, and a higher risk for chronic illness. Cities are becoming obesity-prone environments as car use is limiting the amount of physical activity in our communities. So what can you do to help? You can bike. You can also lobby your universities and municipalities to implement a 3-part plan making cycling easier. Step 1. Reduce the number of cars. Schools should introduce bike lanes on their campuses to help students get around in ease. Bike lanes will connect student residences, academic buildings, and areas surrounding campus to make a bike-friendly environment. Step 2 of the proposed action plan suggests improvements towards public transit to encourage students to bike a part of their trip and to give cyclists better options during inclement weather. E-bike sharing on campus is the 3rd and final step to the proposed action plan. Allowing students to have access to free e-bikes on campus is a great way of encouraging active transportation. So just remember, ditch the car and bike to school.
So that's one of the examples. And then in a totally different style, I just wanted to share one more.
If I told you the sky was black today, you probably wouldn't believe me. But the people in Beijing, they would agree with me. See, they have to wear masks just to read. Kids can't go to school to create the lives that they believe. Parents can't go to work for the children and families that they need to feed. And the reason is they pollute the air which they breathe by burning the coal that creates the power they need. It also releases gases that cause their breathing.
The smoke that is formed decreases their sight, contaminates the air within their lungs. The air has killed masses, thousands of nights. And to add to that, if cancer isn't enough, future generations may have birth defects like asthma, Down syndrome, dysfunctional lungs, emissions from their cars, from their industries, from their homes, and set records all over the world.
The social norms have changed with the times. People cannot go freely outside. They can no longer properly socialize. They can't live an ideal life. They need the power from the coal to survive. So I guess you could say it's a source of illness and a source of life. But this doesn't have to be the way.
Research shows that there is a solution. Always rise above the plight of pollution. Abandon coal and adopt new resources. Renewable energy is the new resolution. Solar, wind, and biomass sources are at the forefront of China's green energy goal. Supply the energy equivalent of 32 million tons of coal. That's enough energy to supply 14 million people across the country. 14 million men, women, and children that don't need to suffer the smoke.
I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's definitely a solution. It's part of the cooperation of people old and new. Better manage your energy. impact will definitely be put.
So those are just 2 examples. We have 35 more of all sorts of different creative ideas. Now, in past years, this is the first time I've done the EduTalks, but 3 years for the 2014, 15, and 16, we competed in the Jack Rosen Award, which is a faculty competition on environmental innovation. And we've done really well in that. And Mila is going to speak a little bit about that experience because she was one of our winners last year. And in previous years, we've also been successful as well. So over those 3 years, we had 3 groups come in second. And every year I say, this is the year we're going to come in first. So I'm really impressed with all of them, though. They go and they compete against PhD students, master's students. It's phenomenal, phenomenal work. So these are 2 examples of how this competition and the collaborative work in the class has evolved over the last 4 years. I also wanted to briefly mention the other aspect of that writing skill, which is report writing. So again, I want to ground their work in real life. And this is a real life competition. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. The Canadian Institute of Planners holds an annual competition of great places. And people submit ideas for great streets, great neighborhoods, great public spaces. So what I've had the students do this year is to write a report to their mayor, their hometown mayor, and suggest 2 places that they think in their hometown are great spaces and to justify it using the 3 pillars of sustainability. And I told them, you should actually send this to your mayor. Like, why not? Why does it need to stop in the classroom? So this is what they're doing actually as we speak. I'm sure they're literally writing it as we speak right now because it's due very soon. Yeah. And then finally, I have a challenge game. And I do this really strategically because it's really important, in my opinion, to hone some of the soft skills that don't often get taught in communications courses directly or are more difficult to grade. So almost every year I do time management. Like, let's plan out the schedule. Let's make sure that you know when your class deadlines are. Sometimes I interchange, in 2015, we had national elections, so I said, let's get involved in your political community. And this year, I was running a Science in the Square event back in September, and I said, let's get involved in your local community. So I switch this out from time to time. But what I always have are seeking help on campus. And help on campus means going to the library or going to the career center or going to health services and seeking mental health, because professionals can never just do this alone. We rely on a huge network, and I want them to get into the habit of relying on others and seeking help when they need it. In class, we run the art of asking good questions. So when our guest speakers come in, whether they're the chief planner of Hamilton or a sustainability planner from the city of Kitchener, they are actively asking questions for bonus marks. And then the 4th challenge, which I always leave to the end of the semester, is to express gratitude. I talk about writing thank you notes to employers and why that's important. And then I challenge them to write a thank you note to anybody that has helped them, parents, former teachers, friends, and then we get the whole gamut. And the idea is that, again, we don't do this alone. Professionals rely on others, and it's important to express gratitude. And I can explain this point system for anybody who's interested, but I'll just leave it there for now. And embedded in all of this is the belief that we have different styles of learning. So I've really tried, especially this year, to bring in multiple intelligences. So you heard that music at the beginning, that's very strategic. And on Friday, when I summarize the class, I'll actually summarize it as a playlist. So for students who are musically inclined, they'll be able to remember what we've learned by connecting it with music. We do class activities that get people up and moving. So last week we did a negotiation exercise where people had to literally get up in their seats and go negotiate with somebody they don't know. And all of these are embedded in the class, and I can, if you're interested in different details, I can share that with you after as well. That was a little loud. That happens in my class often, and they tell me sometimes I play the music too loud. So just in summary, these are 4 learning outcomes have been embedded in every aspect of the class. And it looks a little bit like this. So the core assignments tackle all of those learning outcomes. And as you can see, they're spread out over the weeks. Actually, in designing this, I've thought now I perhaps need another assignment at the very beginning. So to see this spatially is really helpful. And then I add on those challenges that are spread out throughout the term as well. And then finally, the lecture and tutorial content. So I've just added these here. We do everything from note-taking at the very first week, how to take effective notes in a university classroom and how to read effectively when you've got textbooks this thick and only an hour of time. We also do teamwork skills. What are some of the core functions and dysfunctions of teams, and how can you kind of help to mitigate that? And that's built into the very first assignment, which is a team contract. I brought in our library colleagues this year to talk about peer review. And shockingly, a good chunk of folks did not know what peer review is, at least shocking for me. So now I'm going to be completely revamping my class to make sure that that is taught at the very beginning of the semester of first year. And concluding at the very end with negotiation skills and why negotiation matters, particularly for women. For the last 4 years, I've run an experiment in this class where I asked them to write on a business card their name, their future occupation when they graduate, and flip it over and write their expected salary. And for the 4th year in a row, our women have said that they expect less. This year was the biggest gap of $12,000. So negotiation is a really critical part of communications, particularly for women. And I would love to, through maybe one of the light grants, to explore this campus-wide, because I think it's quite interesting. Anyway, and then I'm going to leave this to Paul, but there's a lot going on in tutorials as well that helps to reinforce the lecture content and also to bring up topics that I don't have time to discuss in lecture, such as cognitive and identity diversity. We do Myers-Briggs testing and the Harvard implicit bias test, and a lot of that gets reinforced in tutorial. Oh, and finally, where the theme song. We now have a theme song for grammar. Sorry, that was so loud. And what happened this year, I played that theme song for the last time on Friday. I said, this is your last time you're going to be hearing this song. And there was actually people going, oh, really? Which is that I've never had grammar be appreciated in this way before. And very lucky for me, I have a TA who has a PhD in English. Amazing. So he's been doing those grammar interventions this year, and next year I'll pick it up myself. So that is this class in a nutshell, and I don't want to speak anymore because I have amazing students here who are going to tell you different aspects of the course. So let me hand it over. We just lost it. Yeah. Oh. Maybe it goes something like this. Maybe you can just...
Backwards, but that's okay. Sorry?
To your right, so...
Yes. Like that?
It's rubbing to the shape, as you can see.
Oh,
I'll
like you do it.
try it out, yeah. Whoops. How about this with that? Yeah. I'm just going
Looks
to go
good.
there and ask you to talk.
Okay,
And
sounds good.
only after I do this can I start talking.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to test this out to make sure we're good. We're good? Awesome. So yeah, my name is Paul Cech. Just a little bit of a background on myself. I started off in the college system. I've got a diploma in civil engineering from a college. Worked for a couple years, then decided that wasn't quite my thing, and I decided to go into planning. I've been here since 2014. I took this class, Plan 102, in 2014, so that's been 3 years ago. Since then, I've also done a year of co-op. So I've got some experience from co-op in the field. And now I am a TA in this class. I think you're all here to listen to me describe my experiences teaching. And I want to say that although I've done some teaching in this class, a lot of what I do is guiding. I think there's a slight difference between the two. In terms of teaching, what I'll sometimes do is, like the professor said, pick up on things that we didn't have time to do in lecture. And sometimes I will also add my own personal experiences into the lessons. And I do that because from my experiences in Plan 102, I found that where the light bulb really went off in understanding why communication is so important was once we had guest speakers in our class from outside in the real world. I think they really added a lot of color to the lessons that were being shown. And because I've got this experience, I've tried to do the same for my students. In terms of guiding, the assignments are structured in a way, I find, that they provide a scaffold for the activity. Okay, so they provide a base, they provide a foundation for the activity. And when the students are in my class, it's things on the periphery that kind of come out and become evident for these students. So things like working in a group is something that has come out a number of times in various groups. And they'll come to me with questions about how to deal with group conflict, how to manage group conflict, how to manage groups not seeing eye to eye, not agreeing on things. And so we'll talk about in groups things like consensus, building, negotiations, compromise, things that are really important for them once they get out into the real world. And that's something that I emphasize to them when we're discussing this, that the lessons that they learn here aren't just things that are confined to this classroom. They're things that they're going to be using once they get out into the real world as well. That this is kind of a way for them to practice. And practice is something that I emphasize with them as well. And it really comes into presentations, which is something that I found that with my students, they're kind of hesitant about it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the practice that's important. It's the practice that I try to give them in tutorials. When I decide what we do in tutorials, part of what I try to work into the lesson plan is finding ways to get them to practice things. So if there's an opportunity for them to get up and speak, I try and work it into the activity. So there's a couple of things that have been brought up that I'd like to touch on as well. There was obviously the peer review that we did, and as the professor said, quite rightly, my groups took that into account when they saw the way that their peers had reviewed their work. So the way it worked was everybody got feedback from a couple people in the class. It was a double-blind review. Nobody knew whose feedback they were getting or who they were giving feedback to. And these groups took it, and I had one group that said, yeah, everybody's telling us that our idea for the project isn't really something that's going to work well. It's not something that's going to potentially be the greatest way to move forward this project. We're going to completely scrap it and start off on something new. And this is a part where I came in, is that they came to me and said, hey, Paul, we obviously can't proceed with this idea. Can you kind of help us to figure out what we should do from here? Okay, so that's kind of some of the guiding that I've done. I obviously don't do the work for them, but I kind of show them ways to proceed to deal with this problem. I see a hand up there, yes?
Can I ask just a quick question?
Yeah.
I know when I got my first peer reviews, they were pretty upsetting. How do you manage student responses to those peer reviews?
So the wonderful thing about the way we've done it in this class, and I said that the assignments form a scaffold for the activities. One of the things that we did before we did this peer review was look at how to give proper feedback. So one of the techniques that Professor Mitchell teaches the class is the sandwich technique, where you start off with something positive, and then you end off with something positive, and you sandwich the stuff that's not so positive in between the two. And looking at the peer reviews that my class did, that's certainly something that they used very well. Yeah.
So you found students were okay with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it was very positive. The experience was positive, and it helped certain groups figure out that they needed to adjust what they were doing. So there was that group that absolutely said we need to scrap things, but I also had groups where they said, you know, we need to tweak things a little bit, we need to change things. There's some suggestions in the feedback that we got that were good suggestions, good ideas, and they incorporated it and moved forward. The other thing that was mentioned here was the Myers-Briggs test. I'm a huge fan of engaging with information in different ways. It's one of the ways that helps me learn. And so when we're looking at the Myers-Briggs test, typically what happens is that you take the test, it spits out some results, and then you know that you are these 4 letters. What I did with my class was the exact opposite. Over the course of the term, like I mentioned, I had been telling them little stories about myself, little things here and there. And when we were looking at the Myers-Briggs test, what I had them do was try to guess what type I am. And believe it or not, they actually got it in 3 tries. But it was just a different way of engaging with this information, is that it's no longer, here's the information being spit out at you. It's now, take the information that you know about me and try to use it to figure out something. So those are some of the activities that we've done. I think just to wrap things up, in terms of what I've learned from this experience, is a couple things. The first thing comes from working with ideas. I think in our field, we spend a lot of time trying to distill down to an idea, incorporating a lot of, trying to incorporate a lot of feedback from residents, trying to get them involved in the process as early as possible to generate ideas. And one of the things that I've taken away from this course is some techniques on how to do that, how to get people to develop ideas, how to work with those ideas, how to turn those into a product. The other thing that I've learned from it, and I've kind of touched on this already a bit, is in terms of group dynamics. I think that wherever we go, we're going to be very likely working with groups of people. We don't always see eye to eye with those people. We don't always agree on things, but it's a part of our working life for most of us, I think. I don't think a lot of us work individually. And so it's understanding ways of navigating those situations. Some ways are obviously much different, much better than others, and it's quite often a contextual thing. And so, having been through this class myself, as well as having watched a class now navigate group work as well, I think I've kind of learned some ways of navigating these situations. Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'll pass it over here. So this goes on like this. Is this good? No.
That seems fine.
Yeah?
Maybe clear the center if it works.
Yeah, of course.
That really helps. Yeah. And I'm going to do the same
Sure.
thing.
Is this good? Awesome. Hi, friends. My name is Miila Tuju, and here's kind of a little bit of a story of how Carrie changed my life. So last year, I was in first year, and I took 102 with her. I've never been to, I consider this the big city, whereas everyone else is from Toronto or Toronto, and that's the big city, I don't know. And so I was super nervous, and I was just kind of getting into the university vibe when she announces that we're going to be put into random groups and do this whole Jack Rosen thing, and I went home and I cried. I was so afraid of it. I don't know anybody coming to this university, or at least in planning, and I was so nervous and overwhelmed by this thought that I was just afraid. I was terrified, and classes kind of progressed, and we met our groups, and they ended up being pretty cool. And we were thinking about our idea for the Jack Rosen thing. Maybe this is why she doesn't do it anymore. She's tired of coming in second here. But we were thinking about our ideas, and we couldn't get anything to stick. I had something, and Yasmin had something, Lois and Mark, and nothing was really working. And we were sitting downstairs in Williams, and we see Professor Mitchell come up to order something at Williams, and we thought, she's gonna serve us a "you suck" sandwich. You're good, you're good. And she comes and she sits down with us, and we're anxious, and we tell her our idea sort of about bikes, and she's like, it's great. And we're like, okay. So we took "it's great" from you, and we kind of developed it. We thought, okay, bikes are good. Professor Mitchell rides a bike. We'll get extra kind of edge here if we have this bike idea. And so we kind of came through to the conclusion of a bike where the pedals are detachable, and they also serve as portable chargers, because as you pedal, you're generating energy. Little generators in there serve as power banks, because my phone is always dead, because I don't pay attention in class. And so we made our little presentation. We practiced and we rehearsed it. We were feeling okay about it. And for our tutorials, we brought up a bike. That was our prop. And we didn't think much of it, as many of our classmates did, because they thought, oh, whatever, there's 50 groups or something, like it's not going to be us. It was us who were chosen. They thought we were just so great. And so we were put into the semifinals, where there were a whole bunch of other groups. I think there was a total of like 10 other groups. None of them were first years like us. Every single one was at least maybe one second year. The rest were PhD, masters, fourth years. And we thought, oh. So we get up there with our little bike and our presentation, and we, pass the mic between us. And Miriam, the advancement officer, she was running this partially. She said, I don't like that there's 4 people up here. Make it 1, make it less choppy. And we rock, paper, scissors it out, and I was the one who had to present. And so we did it again with just me, and she said, okay, great. Keep rehearsing. So we kept rehearsing. We're still doing our assignments, doing our other stuff, and come the final day, November 23rd, we walk up into Needles Hall, a building which I had never been in. We were lost. But we found the room, and again, I'm sitting there. There's all of these professors, and there's my friends, and like our group, and all of these other presenters, and they're doing such a great job. And I'm up here, little first year, talking, or at least that's how I felt. I felt so small. I felt kind of insignificant, talking to them about this idea that probably wouldn't come to flourish, but we were passionate about it anyway. And we're waiting on the results, and we're all very anxious, and we were certain that we weren't going to get anything. I kept making eyes with Professor Mitchell across the room, but lo and behold, we came second. We came second, and we were partially blown away, but also really proud of ourselves that we did. We haven't quite moved on from this yet. Yeah, there's the picture, there's me and Professor Mitchell. And although we didn't go through with this idea, we are still all mostly friends. We still at least say hi to each other when we see each other. And we came out of here with some pretty good experiences. Most immediately, aside from winning a small amount of money, we found that working in a group and making that group contract, having, it turns out that all of us were the exact same type for the Myers-Briggs test, like to the letter. And I found it was really easy to connect with them based on that, but even so, without knowing that, working on that group contract, working together with this idea, and all of us being kind of on the same level of passionate, that's what really brought us through. I'm finding now in some groups, we should have written up a team contract first with now in second year, but I also found that it totally pushed me out of my comfort zone. I didn't go home and cry after this. I called my mom, and then I cried, but happy cry. And from here on, it's kind of pushed me. I could never imagine me being up here doing this in first year. If you told me, hey, Mila, guess what you're going to do in 2 years? I'd say, nope. I also found that there were some strengths and weaknesses associated with this as well. Some of the strengths is, like I said, it pushed me out of my comfort zone, and it also, I've got notes on my hands, everybody. It also made me realize the importance of preparation, and it also prepared me for situations like this, for co-op interviews. There's a reason we do mock interviews. There's a reason we do all of these little presentations, negotiations, things like that. It's so that you can get up there, you can talk, you can feel comfortable up here. One of the weaknesses, though, on kind of the flip side of that same coin, is that some people aren't necessarily comfortable with that. Some people will take that step up. Some people can't. Some people are a lot better at math, and maybe that's their talent instead. Of course, people can be good at math and speaking, some people, they have talent in other places, and it might be really challenging for them to get up there and push themselves this far when maybe they're pushing themselves far in maybe piano lessons or maybe in their writing style or something else. So it's hard to kind of see where people are, their positionality and where they are and what they want to do, how passionate they are. You can't make someone more passionate about something when they're already on the fence and not feeling it. Maybe a little bit of a push, but if they're really not vibing with it, maybe it's best to focus somewhere else. But overall, it was great to see kind of what my takeaway from this was. Like I said, I'm up here, I'm presenting now, and I feel a lot better prepared. I almost expect, not the Jack Rosen thing in every class forever, but I expect classrooms to be run the same way that Professor Mitchell's was, with the same level of support that we got from the TAs, and even her coming down and sitting with us in Williams, and having that kind of support, that push, and that ability to get up there and share and feel like what university should really feel like in a classroom. That's all for me. Pass this back to you.
Thank you. So perhaps we could take some questions now. Yes.
I have just a couple of questions. One, logistically, when you're teaching something like prototyping, or when the assignment is to do something like produce a video, how do you balance the need for the practical skill set to make a video, to edit it, to do music or sound, that kind of stuff, with the rest of your course content and the time?
Yeah, so sometimes I just go in and think about this later. So I went in thinking, well, they're 17. Of course they know how to make a video. and in fact, some of them did not know how to make a video, but all of them managed. And I'm not sure, it would be actually really interesting to know how much extra time did it take them to learn the skill. But I wanted to show you those two different videos because one, in my opinion, required a lot more technical skill, the cartoon, and the other one just was technically easier, but required still a lot of effort to create that kind of poem of sorts. So I let them do as they wish, and I said there is no right way. I showed them some videos from a class that I'd run 2 years ago, and I'd used the videos as an example, and they saw the videos on EduTalks, so they knew what the standard was, and then we let them go. And I did actually offer them educational login for particular video editing software, but nobody ended up taking me up on it. So maybe, Paul, you can just talk about, because they would tell you a little bit more about the challenges in tutorial.
Yeah, actually, it's very surprising. I had no questions about how to make videos at all. So from my perspective, everybody, it wasn't a monumental task. Everybody was able to figure out how to do it, and evidently they did it quite well. Actually, the first video that was shown here was from one of my tutorials. So yeah, it wasn't that challenging, surprisingly. Yeah.
But I took a little bit of a risk in doing that, right? Yeah.
Sorry, so I guess class logistics, I was amazed when you showed the list of TAs. We get half a TA for 120 students. So how did you get all those TAs?
Okay. So I don't think I would be able to do this with half a TA for 120 students. This is one of the core communications class. So across the university, there is a push for communications classes. And this is one of the faculty of environment, it is the School of Planning's core class. So they do allocate more TAs. So what I have, which not everybody has, are 3 graduate TAs and 3 undergraduate TAs. So here, Paul is running the extra tutorial group this year. We went from 6 to 7, and my undergraduate TAs run the challenge game. So if I didn't have those TAs, this would be this would be difficult. But I have them because this is one of the core communications courses for the Faculty of Environment, and each department will have one. And so there is a strong push for TA support, but if I didn't have the undergrad TAs, I could just run this without the challenge game. There'd be ways to shift this, but I absolutely need TA support to make this happen because the tutorial is essential to.
So did you have to sort of put forward a plan and say, this is what I need?
When I took over the course in 2014, they had already had 6 TAs allocated from the previous professor who had perhaps negotiated for that. Yeah. So I've never had to argue about this. One year I did go with less undergrad TAs. I had 2 instead of 3. I could run this, if we were using our regular 125 cohort, I could run it with 3 graduate TAs. Or senior undergraduate TAs. Yeah, I invited Paul here for a reason. It's because he's amazing. So it doesn't necessarily require graduate TAs, but it requires a high level of maturity and ability to engage with students. So it could be done with specific undergrad TAs, but I need at least 3 TAs for the course of 125, or in this case, 157, 4 TAs. So maybe that's a higher administrative issue in the faculties about support. Yeah.
You obviously have a lot of passion for this way of teaching, and my question is somewhat similar, but more in terms of your time. Because to prepare a class like this, and even a normal class, requires a tremendous investment, but you've got a lot of management that you have to do with other people, and a lot of development, a lot of technological input to it, plus all the other time. And how does this compare to what might be called, I don't know if you can do this, but a normal university class? And how do you manage all the other things you're doing as a professor as well?
Okay, I do think that my experience in professional practice has a lot to do with, like, to me, managing 6 graduate students or undergrad is not an onerous task, because I was managing multiple teams in multiple countries when I was working for the International Development Research Center. So coming in here, it was really natural to continue this way of learning and teaching, because that's what I had done for 5.5 years previous to coming. So all of my courses are kind of like this. At the 3rd year level, I teach a research methods course where I actually run them through an entire research project from start to finish, including them picking the research topic. It does take a lot of work, but it's so much more fun to teach it. Like, standing up here and talking for 2 hours is almost as boring for them as it is for me. I can't do that. So to me, this just feels natural, and it's the way I learn by doing, and it's the way that I was taught at IDRC to engage with my research grantees, and it's just been a natural continuation here at Waterloo. But certainly it does take a little bit more effort. We do meet every week. We have a tutorial meeting, the 7 of us, and we go over every detail. And I do have a general schedule for tutorials, but I let all of my TAs have a bit of leeway and ownership and agency in the tutorial as well. So we have different levels of, some TAs are phenomenal and others are really good. I haven't had, they come in and they try really hard and they engage with their students, and I make them learn their names. Like, you have 50 students, you better know all their names by the end of week 3, because I know their names and they're in a big lecture hall. So I try to put forward a team effort. It doesn't work, I can't do this alone. But we engage every week. We have weekly meetings. We meet after lecture, and it's a constant process of course correction, literally and figuratively. But it's just the natural way I've been trained to work.
So we need that type of course for the faculty. Like more than just this one seminar.
Also, when I think back about my undergraduate education, the only person I remember from the University of Guelph was Bram Cadsby. He was a macroeconomics teacher, and the reason I remembered him was because he was literally jumping up and down about opportunity cost. He was so passionate, he was so excited, and I've been meaning to write him a letter about why I still remember him, and thank you for being a passionate teacher. But if we can't be passionate about our subject, how can we expect students to be passionate about it? And when Professor Woodsma gave me this course, I remember thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't believe, I'm not a communications teacher, but it's actually shaped my research. So now I do research on climate change communication, and we have published papers that have not come out directly of this course, but from the ideas that I've collected as part of researching for this course. So it's been a wonderful experience, and I didn't anticipate that 4 years ago.
You talked about the mashup exercise, really fun, lovely. And using that as an example, or any of the other ways that you do this, can you talk about the transition from that example and having fun in class with the example to how that plays out in the actual group work? When did they do their ideation? Because the story, that you told was about, sitting around in Williams and everybody has their own idea, and so I'm curious about how that works at each step of the way around the circle.
Yes, so Mila has a slightly different experience than what my students this year have and what Paul is TAing. So this year, thanks to the Teaching Excellence Academy, I went for 3 days back in the spring, and we really pulled the class apart. It was phenomenal. And I started to really think about, because they taught us with little chunks of information. I thought, what a good idea. So I pulled apart the course, and this design thinking came in as a method for pulling apart a big project into manageable chunks. So I introduce it in lecture, and then the TAs pick it up in the tutorial. So I will do a sample ideate session with we did the lecture hall in the amusement park, and I said, okay, now you've done this, you've gone through it, I want you to do a mashup for your idea. And then they pick that up in tutorial.
So they actually do that in tutorial.
And so do you facilitate that for all of the groups in your tutorial?
Yeah, I do. So typically, they're given time in class to work on this, and what I'll do is I'll just wander around from group to group and kind of see how they're doing, ask them if there's any challenges that they're having, any opportunities for me to help them out, to kind of guide them through the process. But they do it in class. They work on it during class time, yeah.
Carrie, that's a fantastic course, by the way. I want to take it. Send all my KI students. You're doing a lot of stuff in this course, and a lot of different kinds of stuff.
Yes.
Can you comment on, first of all, is it 3 hours a week, and is it in 1.5 hour block? What's the structure?
It's a 2-hour class and then a 1-hour tutorial,
Okay.
or 1 hour 50-minute.
So 2 hours in one block, and then a 1 hour tutorial.
Yeah.
Can you comment on the balance of, correcting grammar, bringing in guest speakers, having them work on their project? Where does all that happen? And maybe how much time do you think they spend outside of those 3 hours on the project versus in those 3 hours?
Yeah, I think I will try to answer the first part of that, Rob, and then let my students answer the second part. But what I try to do, so there is a lot going on, and I'm constantly asking myself, is there too much going on? But for me, strategic communications means all these different elements. And so if I try to introduce it in a logical way. So for the first hour, we will do, some of the key concepts. Let's see if I can go. So we'll deal with some of these note-taking and reading skills, for example. But I'll do that within the context of bringing in people from the Writing Center, from Career Services, from the library. So they get kind of mini guest lectures. They get introduced to other services on campus, but they're also being trained to take Cornell notes or concept mapping. And I give them a strategy for reading as well. So we kind of sometimes do two things at once. The teamwork skills gets introduced in lecture in terms of an actual lecture based on research on teamwork, and then it gets applied through the course. So I always try to have about an hour where I'm giving them new content, and then an hour in the lecture where I'm reinforcing it or letting them work in groups, or reinforcing it essentially as an example. And then it gets picked up in tutorial as an example with their own project. So that's something that I've really, more so this year, tried to do very deliberately to break that lecture up into different chunks. New information, reinforcing the information, and then further reinforcing the information in tutorial. And I guess only my students will know if it's just blowing their mind too much information. I'm not sure, so I think I'll just hand it over to them.
Want to take this one?
Sure. Time management. Professor Mitchell, one of the good things, thank goodness, was she was telling us about in class. It was only, I think, 15 minutes talking about time management, and it was picked up in tutorials, and I think it was part of a challenge game too, was just map out all the stuff that you have to do for the term. And I didn't think it would be that important, but now I still do it. And as Professor Mitchell was saying, like, she has a lot going on, you know, in this course with her other courses, and as do we, but, you know, we found time in our groups to meet up at Williams. And it's not too bad when you think about it, like, hour by hour. I don't like to think of my life hour by hour, but, you know, you think, okay, I've got until this evening to do stuff, so maybe I'll allocate some of this because this is big and coming up, this is a long-term project, this and that. And then it also depends on what other people are doing. In first year, it was a bit more restricted, like we all had to work on 104, we all had to work on 102. Whereas this year, I'll think, oh, this would be a great time for a group meeting, but turns out not everyone has Fridays off anymore. Things like that. But yeah, no, the definite reinforcement in the tutorials for sure. And I think it really helped in terms of like not only ideas being there, but also like, okay, this is something I should be thinking about. Discussing it really helps as well. We have discussions in one of our other classes, and those really help just kind of reinforce ideas because I'm not writing it down. Maybe I prefer to verbalize ideas, but having that really helps just reinforce it for me. You have anything?
So I just kind of want to reiterate what Mila said here from my experience in this class. We actually, when I was in this class, we wasted a lot of time spinning our wheels, coming up with ideas and realizing that we couldn't do them for one reason or another. We went through this for a month. So in terms of work, we probably added some work onto ourselves just because we were kind of constantly spinning our wheels. Whereas other groups came up with an idea, just rolled with it. And it worked for them. I think it kind of varies from group to group. Some groups will figure things out a lot quicker than others and spend a lot less time on the project. Whereas other groups, you know, I told the story of the group that realized after the peer review that they had to take a step back and revisit their idea. That's a group that probably put in more work than a group that just stuck with the same idea the entire time. I think one of the things that we didn't have when I was doing this class that we have now is a bit of structure to the generation of ideas. And it allows, you know, there's emphasis on iteration. So you take an idea as far as you can, and then you realize at some point that it's not a great idea, and you take a step back and kind of repeat the process. I think with my group, we were doing that too far into the term, whereas these groups now have a chance to do that a lot earlier, and I think that kind of helps reduce some of the time that they spend on the project.
And I do this really strategic, like putting the design thinking into this class, I've done really strategically because professional planners need to be able to fail. And what's going on right now in our cities is they're too afraid to fail. And I want them to get into the process of failing and getting feedback and starting over again. And so my goal is to create better cities. And I start with creating better communicators. And hopefully they don't forget. And by the time they get to professional practice, they're really pushing the envelope. And that can only be done with a real large cohort. You know, one person at a really junior level can't push the envelope. But what if hundreds, thousands of students, and then they become leaders in our cities, can push the envelope? And that is like the big lifetime goal that I try to push a little bit, one student at a time. But the structure of that design thinking is really critical to that. Being able to fail and restart and iterate is what I think professional practice is missing.
Can you return to the way you loaded the term 40, 60, and 3% and rationalize that a little bit?
It's somewhere here. Yes. So the reason that I have put so much emphasis on collaborative work is because of the role that planners play in our cities. A planner never works alone, and I guess unless maybe they're stamping bylaws, but they work with engineers, they work with city councilors, they work with mayors, they work with citizens. So for me, the collaboration is really critical, and it's broken up into 3 assignments over the course of the term. But I can't have a course on essentially writing and communicating without individual work. So I've really struggled with this. And I think after actually preparing this presentation, I'm going to take away the test and add another report. Just so it evolves every year. But I think the individual writing is also really critical, and to give them feedback early on their writing. Some of them are beautiful writers. Most of them are not. And it's really important to give them early critical feedback, but supportive feedback on their writing. So we do that through the challenge game, the very first assignment. We grade that grammatically and structurally, but it could also be done in an assignment format as well.
Can I follow up once with the 40%? Is that one group grade, or how do you assess?
So the first is a 5% group contract. So 5%, they have to write up a contract between the 3 or 4 people in the group, or 4 or 5, sorry, and that's 5%. And then that big proposal is 25%. And they have the feedback with the double-blind peer review, which is a tutorial participation grade. So they don't lose out if they have to scrap their idea. But by participating in that activity on PAIR, which is this system that Scott introduced me to, they get that feedback early on. So then they submit with 25%, and then the video is 15%. And that's how I've broken it up this year. Every year I kind of tweak it a little bit, but I like this. It gives enough weight to the video at this point that they put some effort into it. And it will be graded using the same criteria that is on the EduTalks website. There's 5 elements of criteria, including scientific accuracy and creativity. And I've just created a rubric that is exactly the same as that. And the same with the proposal. It gets graded on grammar, punctuation, all the mechanics, but it also gets graded on those 5 criteria that EduTalks has put forward. And when we do the Jack Rosen Award, we use the criteria from Jack Rosen.
You said you're going to take away the test, but I'm just curious about the test that you're using because you're focusing so much on skill development in the classroom. What are you actually testing in that test?
So what I'm going to use the test for, and every year this changes. I think when Paul took the class in 2014, I had an exam and it was worth 30%, and it was asking them to regurgitate the textbook to me.
Midterm too.
And a midterm. Oh, yes, that was brutal. And so every year I've taken this out. And now my tests are application. So what I'm going to do for this year's cohort is to pull out the Canadian Institute of Planners Code of Conduct and ask them to apply some of those codes to what they've learned in the class. So moving away from I can memorize the textbook and this is what low context versus high context cultures, and how they communicate, to actually applying the work. And it's worth 10%. It'll be done in class, but it could easily be incorporated into lecture participation points in the future. So I don't think a test is actually required in a course like this, but I've included one this year just because it's hard to let go of tests. I don't know, we all grew up with them. We took them at every stage of a university and high school career. It's hard to let go. But my colleagues at CTA are like, why do you have a test? What are you actually trying to test? And that's why I've moved away from that rote memorization into an application style test. Yeah.
So I'm interested about group work. My experience with group work is typically there's 1 or 2 people in the group that do all the work, and a couple people that don't do any work, and 1 person or 2 people that kind of. Is this your experience, and how do you, then you always get into the students not being very happy about it, so.
No, I don't disagree. I usually end up being one of the people that does a good chunk of the work in my groups. One of the things that we have in this class is a peer assessment of each group member, and that just it allows the group members to give anonymous feedback to each of their group members on how they performed in various areas. There's a quantitative part to it as well as a qualitative part to it. So they're ranking their group just on a score out of 5, as well as providing some feedback, again, hopefully in that sandwich technique, on how it was working with them. So I'm doing minor in psychology, and in psychology they tell us that part of dealing with this type of thing is that where people fear that they'll be assessed, they tend to perform better in groups. Assessment or feedback of some sort typically helps with that, and where you see it's called loafing, where certain people are not carrying their full.
But anyway,
Sorry.
we call it shirking, but anyway.
Shirking. It tends to be where they're not afraid of being assessed by their peers. There's no consequences for that. Part of, I think, the strength of this class is that there is some sort of assessment.
I can just add to that.
Anyway.
Well, I also have in my syllabus that the grades can be adjusted based on peer feedback. And last year I did decrease, I bring them in, because usually there's a rationale for what's happening. You know, when somebody isn't working, especially in a first semester course, something's going on. So I bring that person, it's like we're talking about 2 or 3 people. We're not talking about a lot. It's not a massive amount of my time. But I say, what's going on? Like, what's happening here? And then they tell me stories like, I don't know if I'm in the right program. I think I really should be a designer, but my parents want me to be a planner. You know, or I'm overwhelmed, somebody died. You know, and you hear these kind of stories. And so I take all that into consideration when I'm making a final grade. And sometimes I just hear, you know, I was lazy. Sorry. I said, okay, well, 20% lower than your other peers. You know, so last year was the first time I've actually adjusted a grade. Never had to do it before, but I adjusted it 10% down based on the fact that she wasn't working. And you know what? She's now, I have her again as a student, and she's working beautifully. So I think, but knowing why is really critical, because there's usually a rationale behind the behavior. And that so few students overall that I have the time to check in with them.
May I add?
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add is that the group contract did help kind of hold people accountable. Usually we try to, okay, you have this part, but a group contract that's especially marked, the profs have record of it, that's good. But sometimes it just, you get a group that's good, and sometimes it sucks. Sometimes it sucks and you end up doing all the work, and this is happening in one of my courses right now. But one thing to take away from it, especially with this peer eval, is that if this were a real job, they would be fired. You know, we're in second year and they're still not doing anything. Well, guess what? With the peer evals now, that's it. I'm not going to have to work with you again, or I'm not afraid to call them in for a meeting because I'm not compromising a friendship at this point. It's a working relationship. And so when people don't do their work, maybe it's just I'm not afraid, but I'm going to give them the feedback they deserve. And I really like when peer feedback is really heavily taken into account, because you know, a professor can't know everything. I can't send Professor Mitchell screenshots of our conversations of so-and-so not responding or whatever. And so I think, yes, the hitting it from before with like the group contract, the accountability, that really helps kind of reinforce it and show people, yeah, you should be doing work, otherwise there will be consequences. And I think having not necessarily more severe consequences, but you didn't do your work. You know, in a job you'd be fired. In this course, you shouldn't get that mark, or a good part of that mark for what you didn't do.
Question for Mila. When you talk about your presentation, and you said you were the one that presented, but maybe some people are uncomfortable getting up, and so there should be. So as an instructor, I'm always struggling with how much do we accommodate different types of learners, and how much is this about professional planners need to know how to communicate. So
right.
Maybe you're uncomfortable about it, but you got to get up and do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, what's your reaction to that?
You're right. Yeah, there is a degree of, come on, get up there. But I think there's also, it's important to know that in presenting and giving talks, you have to have a certain sense of self. You have to have a sense of humility almost in a way. You have to be not embarrassed. In high school, we focused a lot on, you'd see people come up and they wouldn't focus on presentation skills. So people would just be out in the back and they'd be talking and blah, blah, blah. But in university, you have to be able to get up here. And there is, yes, a degree where, I understand that people are uncomfortable. It's a hard thing to get over. It's a hard kind of hurdle to climb here, where you've gone from sitting down and never participating, and now you've got this class full of 150 strangers, and you've put up your hand, and what if you say something stupid, or you're all the way up at the Jack Rosen thing, and you've got Honey Rosen watching you, you've got the Dean of Environment marking you, you've got your friend back there on his phone, but you're not facing him, so whatever. And it's just kind of everyone has kind of a different comfort zone, how far they're willing to step out of it. But I think that people who are really successful will be the ones who can step the furthest out or have that greatest sense of awareness and humility and just willingness to share their ideas and kind of get over that self-confidence and image issue.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, quite often with things like this, it's just a matter of diving in. You know, you just gotta take that leap and hope everything works out. I think sometimes though, and I'm going to tell a story in a second from my tutorial, we can kind of make it a little bit easier for students. So we were doing last week little 1-minute presentations for everybody in my tutorial. And what I decided to do with my tutorial is I told them that I'd give them the chance to sign up in the order that they wanted. And what I told them was that people tend to remember the things from the very start of something, a lecture, a presentation, whatever, and the start. And they really tend not to remember what kind of happens in between as much. And so I told them, you know, if you're kind of nervous about getting up there and presenting, sign yourself up in the middle. And what I saw with my tutorial was that it kind of filled in from the middle outwards. But the end result was all the presentations were amazing. Like there wasn't any of that, you know, people kind of staring down at their feet thing or just kind of like mumbling and you can't really understand. None of that. The presentations were fantastic. Quite a few people just kind of got up there and winged it and didn't have anything prepared. And it worked out really well. So from my experience, kind of try and make things a little bit easier for everybody in that first time goes a long way sometimes.
And maybe I can just
Yeah.
add too, is that it is scaffolded in. So, you know, I first give them a lecture on the recipe for resonance, and it's it's built on research on presentations. And then we do the asking good questions in lecture, and they're allowed to say, "Don't call on me, I can't do it." But for those who are willing, we invite them to speak in lecture, just a question. And it's already been pre-screened, they've written it down, so it's not off the top of their head. And then we do these 1-minute talks in tutorial, and then they go to the Jack Rosen Award. So there's multiple stages before that. And I also tell them that when I was sitting in their shoes as an undergrad, the scariest thing in the world was having a professor like eyes go like this and stopping on me. I used to shake and sweat profusely. And after lecturing for years, now it doesn't faze me. I'm an introvert. This is hard work, but the more you practice, the better it gets. And I do think that helps when they hear, you know, somebody who can get up and speak is an introvert just like me. Oh my goodness. What they don't realize is that most university professors are introverts, and you know, we get this way by practice. But what we do in the class is practice and practice and practice until it feels okay, or at least it feels doable.
One more question? How about Justin?
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was so wonderful. My question is actually for Catherine and our CT colleagues in the room, maybe to cap off. So we've heard about a couple of different case or pitch competitions, problem-based competitions that you accessed here with your course. I'm curious if there's any sort of centralized resource or a place where instructors could access opportunities, maybe interdisciplinary opportunities on campus or across. I don't know if there's anything that exists right now.
Wouldn't that be lovely if there is? Yes. No, there isn't. And a lot of the things, one of the reasons we like this is because this would be how you hear about it, and it might prompt you to maybe, oh, I wonder if there's anything in my discipline that's like that. I didn't even know there were such things like that, so you know, I'm sure there's others. Did you stumble across it, Carrie, or did you?
Like other sessions,
You're talking about the public presentations, right? The competition?
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's the velocity, now there's environment velocity. There is the Jack Rosen, which is now into January this year. There's also this massive, Kimberly Foundation has a $10,000 prize for videos. So I tell, like, if you guys like this and you want to expand your video, their deadline is in March. So there's a lot actually going on within and outside the university in different communication
And is it
forums.
something that other disciplines?
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
Maybe what I'll do is maybe
I can-
pull together
yeah.
a little list and we
Yeah.
can send that out if that's something that you're interested in. Guys, we're starting to wind down now, but I wanted to thank Carrie, Paul, and Mila for this presentation. It's always exciting to have the student's perspective and the instructor. A couple of things that I really noticed was Carrie's not only thinking about helping students make the connections to stuff, but actually thinking about her students beyond the course. So they're not students in my course, they're my colleagues of tomorrow. And I want you to meet your colleagues of tomorrow. They're sitting right here in the classroom. So it's just the different spin, you know, that she put on it that made the exercise even more authentic at that time. So thank you very much for that. November 29th, we're doing a presentation on a light grant. It's one on WhatCV. If you're interested, I'll send that around. We'll find out the findings on helping students develop these professional skills in the classroom and what we're finding from that. So I'll give a pitch to that. And thank you for talking about the Teaching Excellence Academy. We have that coming up in April, and that was where Carrie pulled apart her course. If you have courses that you're interested in really working with, that might be something that you might want to consider spending some time. That's in April, is that correct? Yeah. All righty. Thank you again, everyone.